Okay. Hello. Welcome to you all. Hello. My name's John Parker. I'm CEO at the Arboricultural Association, and I'm beaming live into your living rooms and your workplaces and wherever you are from Stonehouse here in the UK. Welcome to the new series of the Arboricultural Association's Wednesday webinars, sponsored by nobody. Nobody sponsored us yet. But we are working on it. If you're out there and you've got deep pockets and you want to be mentioned as a sponsor of the webinars, please feel free to get in touch and let us know. If you've got shallower pockets, but you still want to support us, then you can do that. We're a charity and we offer these webinars for free. So you can go on our website, scroll right the way down the bottom and press the little button that says donate here if you so desire. And of course, the best way to sponsor us is to become a member. So you should become a member, and there's information about that on the webinar on the website as well. We are using a new platform for the first time this evening, and the person who knows how to use that platform is not here. And that means that I am chairing badly and doing the admin badly. So this is a recipe for disaster. I'm hoping it's all going to be okay. We haven't worked out how it works really. There is a chat, so please continue to say hello to everybody because that's always nice. There is a button for questions, so put your questions into that button and we'll try and work through them. We've got lots of speakers today, so if your question is aimed at a specific speaker, then please do write who you want to ask the question to. Otherwise, I should just throw it out there to everybody for them to answer. This evening, we kick off our webinar series with presentations about the recently published National Tree Safety Group's second edition of Common Sense Risk Management of Trees. And we've got a host of speakers for your enjoyment. That also means we're going to get a load of tree-related books. I'm saying that as a little hint for the people who are going to be asked that question later on. So speakers, remember, you will probably be asked a question about your favorite book later on. Before we get on to tonight, a little look at what we've got to come. There's 12 webinars in this series, the first one being today and the last one on February the 11th. There's a gap of a couple of weeks over Christmas. We're still finalizing a couple of speakers, so there's no full program available yet, but I can tell you that next week we're going to be discussing tree establishment with Daisy Brasington and Laura Roman. And then on November the 26th, it will be Matt Disney talking about giant sequoias and Phil Wilkes on measuring carbon at Kew. And you can sign up for those and a few more that are available at the moment right now on our website. So please do that. Okay, on to business. We have got a range of speakers tonight. Simon, could I have the next slide, please? This is when I wonder if there's anyone out there at all and I'm just having an existential crisis. It's there, it's worked. Amazing. Thanks, Simon. So these are our speakers this evening. We've got Caroline Harrison from the Institute of Chart Forests. We've got Harry Studholme from the Forestry Commission. We've got Neville Fay, Tree Work Environmental Practice. Jim Smith from the Forestry Commission. David Ball, Decision Analysis for Risk Management, Middlesex University Consultant. Richard Stead, Barrister. Simon Richmond, our very own Simon Richmond, the Arboricultural Association, and Andy Tipping of the London Tree Officers Association, and a trustee of the Arboricultural Association, it should say, on that list. So we've got some wonderful speakers for you this evening. And our first speaker is Caroline Harrison. So I'm very delighted to welcome Caroline to the virtual stage. Hopefully this will all work properly. Caroline, over to you.
Thank you very much. My goodness, nearly 700 people, not nervous at all. So the ICF, who are we? I'm Technical Policy Manager, I'm a Chartered Forester, and I represent the Institute of Chartered Foresters and Arboriculturalists. So we have the Royal Charter for Forestry and Arboriculture. I've been involved in the National Tree Safety Group for pretty much from the very beginning with Nev and Simon and a whole host of other people. I used to work for the Confederation of Forest Industries. That was when I was first involved. And we were kind of the founding organisations alongside the CLA, Country Landowners Association, RICS, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, and the NFU, bringing our experience from the private sector, so our members were landowners, consultants and practitioners. So we had that kind of nuts and bolts baseline that we could bring to the table. Thank you so much for inviting me to contribute. It's great to be back in the steering group after such a long time. I remember the days of the first edition and the many, many, many days of drafting and editing to produce such excellent guidance. And I think this webinar is going to be a great opportunity to disseminate the changes for the second edition of the guidance. Simon, could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So the strength of the NTSG, I believe, was that there was passion, there was energy. We all wanted to come together to kind of bring common sense, whether or not you like that phraseology, but it was about bringing some sort of common sense to tree safety. And we all used to sit around a table, normally at FC Bristol, and we all had that common goal. Robust, frank discussion, but we all as membership organisations drew from the input from our members. And I think that was a powerful force, considering that collectively we represented pretty much all of the forestry, arboriculture and land management industries. Next slide, a final slide, please, Simon, for me. So as I say, we've been there from the beginning, and we will continue to be involved. We are really proud as an organisation to be able to continue to work with the NTSG, allowing our members to be confident in managing tree safety. Trees deliver so many benefits to society, as we're all very well aware, and we think that this guidance allows our industries to operate with confidence, to make sure that they are operating in a balanced and proportionate way, and I think that is all that we should ask for. That is me. Whether that was 5 minutes or not, I don't know, but I'm sure we can pass over to the next speaker, please. Thank you.
Good evening. I think I just want to really thank everybody for being here, and really to say, you know, the NTSG was pulled together in 2007. Many of the same characters are still here, the result of a rather unexpected response to the Paul and Bartholomew case in 2007. It was essential to pull together in order to try to respond to what was a reaction to this, a group of people to create consensus, and that included quite a few of the people actually who are involved in this seminar, including Neville, Jim, Simon Richmond, David Ball. And the anxiety over landowners was causing historic trees in churchyards and across the country to be felled. And the only way back from there, because the difficulty of an event like this is that it has to be a consensus across society to respond, and you need to have the facts of what the risks are. And the difficulty with tree-related deaths is that unlikely severe events are very newsworthy, and they create a far greater and emotive response than is the likelihood of the event. So, next slide, please. So a group of people, which included as wide as possible a group, came together. We pulled together all the professional bodies, the Arb Association, the BSI were involved in that stage, the Charter Foresters, tree officers, surveyors, tree council, business safety in the countryside, as well as owners and managers. And next slide as well, please, Simon, as well as organisations with heritage and conservation interests, and the Decision Analysis and Risk Management, DALM, at Middlesex University, here represented by David Ball. And by doing that, we were able to find a mandate by arranging a conference in 2008 at the Royal Geographical Society, and commission and find funding from a number of people and commission work into quantifying the risk. And the risks, interestingly, I mean, there are 45 trees per person in the country, about 3 billion, with 5 or 6 deaths per year, which compares to 34 million cars killing 1,600 people a year. they're something like 20 cars are something like 20,000 times more dangerous than trees. And by feeding that, as well as the wisdom of as wide a range as possible to and some pretty good drafting by Jim Smith, Neville, and others, the common sense risk management of trees was born. And the value of this is actually that it's been used for all of the years since 2011, and preparing a second edition which builds on what we've learned for over those 14 years, creates what we started at the beginning with a need for a consensual, well-evaluated, strategic response to the management of trees that can inform landowners and all those involved in tree safety to have a response that is based on a generally accepted public view. And I believe we've been moving gently towards that over all these years, and hopefully the second edition will have the same use and acceptance, in fact more than the previous document. So thank you very much for asking me to talk.
Thanks, Harry. I'm very grateful for your pioneering, sharing, and stewardship over the years. And we've had some powerful chair people that carried us through, and we're at an interesting stage. Each time we've been looking at the issues involved with a very broad range of people within the sector. And as you were saying, Harry, the important thing was to ensure that we had a mandate. We have next slide, Simon. Sorry, I should have pushed us on. Yes, so between the current document that we published in 2024 and the 2011 publication, first edition, 13 years elapsed, and quite a number of things happened in the meantime. So kind of the NTSG continued to exist without kind of necessarily deciding what its role was or what the appetite was for a continuation of whether there was a case for doing any more. In fact, when we got together some 6 years before the publication was finalised, we gradually moved on a pathway towards looking at what the motivation might be to embark on a second edition if that was the case. But can you scroll on, Simon? Sorry. So there are a number of issues that had happened in the interim. There were legal cases, and some of those we'll touch upon later on. The Stagecoach and Hind, Kavanagh and Whitley, Whiteley and Collar and Singh and Parker and so on. So a number of cases that happened in the interim. There were questions coming to us about, well, what do we do in the face of ash dieback, Massaria disease of plane, horse chestnut bleeding canker, and still continuing influence of epidemics and pandemics and so on. And we were looking at this and thinking, well, actually, did anything need to change? We were also, in the meantime, there's a massive amount of real research going into kind of evidence base for what the values and benefits of trees were, and that was kind of a building momentum. There are other publications going on. Can you move on, Simon? Sorry, I keep pressing my button to make it move on. So colleague organisations like Visitor Safety in the Countryside, Visitor Safety Group, they made their publication of their third edition of their guidance, and they were looking at benefit risk assessment and had also had endorsement from the HSE, Health and Safety Executive. And in the meantime, we continued, and Mark Daniels, our very esteemed colleague, was gathering statistics on tree failure, accident data, and court cases that were arising from those, injuries and mortalities, and also prosecutions. So data was maintained up to when we were going to press, and has subsequently continued. And Simon will be talking about that further. Also, we were still involved with HSE, and we were coming into some kind of thorny engagements with them. And Jim will talk about that in a minute. But Hilary Allison, who was our then chair, was very positive and very keen on making sure we had a continued engagement with the HSE. Next slide. And we had originally a number of scenarios in the original document, and because we were involved in consulting within the sector, there was a feeling that this needed to be looked at, made more consistent, and also expand the scope of those to increase their relevance to other duty holders and landowners. Next slide, sir. So continuing the motivation and what developments we've felt. In the original document, we had two sections, one on the benefits, which was quite a kind of a substantial piece of work, but it was an appendix, as was the assessment or explanation of trees as natural shedding organisms that in a way don't need us. We create the problem for ourselves. And also move on, Simon, sorry. Next slide. Next. Yeah, so what was originally the tree as a natural shedding organism was part of an appendix. So it was a bit of an afterthought in that document. It was thought because so much had happened in the meantime in terms of conservation arboriculture, concepts of irreplaceable habitat in ancient trees. This is kind of pretty substantial piece of awareness building, and the kind of nature of ancient veteran trees and the ancient tree form and its work had really expanded it and become much more embedded in the whole world of arboriculture. And David Lonsdale contributed a lot to this rejigging, rethinking, and then these two sections were put as section 2 and 3, past the introduction as and before the risk side, to really put that front and center of the document. We also were involved in clarifying, looking at the terminology again, and determined to revamp the website, make it accessible, interactable, usable, and we now have an accident data page, actually launched pretty well yesterday, I think it was, and that's concerning fatalities, injuries, and prosecutions. And a very, very useful piece of work, thanks to Mark Daniels again. So moving on. So if you just run them through, the second edition took 6 years to from inception to publication. It continued to the situation as far as duty of care to employees, visitors, and general public hadn't changed, and the number of cases that had built up, there was a position that this needed to be reviewed and brought up to date, and also reflect the policy developments that had happened at a national level in terms of things like trees and woodland strategy, biodiversity net gain, and so on. And then there were other parts of the document that we determined to make more fit for purpose in terms of feedback and so on, in terms of advice giving on reasonable management and on the scenarios. Next slide, Simon. So, as Harry was saying, the first edition had three documents. One was the main book, effectively, the full guidance, a landowner summary, and a householder leaflet. So there are three parts to it, all downloadable, as well as being a hard copy. Next slide, Simon. So the second edition has only two sections, two parts. One is the full document, which is quite significant, and then a summary document. The summary document, the summary guidance, is really does not have the scenarios in it, and so there is. It's important, Andy will be describing scenarios at the end of this our work tonight. It's important that we see the main document as if it's as something that's kind of sits on the bookshelf and is kind of referred to by organisations, HSE and the courts, and the user document is in the summary document. But actually, it must the full guidance should be seen as the reference document. Next slide. Importantly, in the first edition, we came to these 5 key principles, which were the basis of common sense risk management of trees. Second edition simply reconfirms these principles. There's no change in that, and they stand, and they've been our foundation throughout. Benefits of trees. Trees are living organisms. The overall risk to public safety is extremely low, and that's a technical term, extremely low. And that's a general risk rather than specific risk. Tree owners have a legal duty of care, and tree owners need to take no more than a balanced and proportionate response to risk. Next slide, Simon.
Okay.
And if you just run through these. So essentially, the chapters or sections of the book, 7 sections, whereas there were 5 before, plus 2 appendices. In yellow, the benefits and the nature of living trees, as you're saying, are now form at the heart of the guidance. And just lastly, I have to say, in working through the nature of living trees, it's often the section that isn't necessarily read, but I think it's pretty fundamental to the document. It's pretty fundamental to all those who care and manage trees, and that is that trees are natural shedders. We look at the life stage, and how the habitat biodiversity increases with age, and the importance of that. The basis of understanding the tree is kind of as a living organism, and how it actually incorporates dead wood and dead matter in its body, and the hollowing, which is often seen as being had historically been seen as a basis for tree removal, does not necessarily mean the tree is unhealthy or structurally unsound or reduced in strength necessarily, and the principle that they incorporate decay, and so on. So that the nature of living trees, I just finished with this, is to my mind very critical in our understanding. I think that's where we've got to. And so I hand you over to Jim. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Nev. That was great. Hello, everybody. I'm Jim Smith. I'm from the Forest Commission. I'm the Forest Commission's National Urban Forestry Advisor. I'm just going to speak a bit about our engagement with the Health and Safety Executive. And for those of you who are from abroad, the Health and Safety Executive is the United Kingdom's government's agency for enforcing the relevant legislation for health and safety, which is the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. And the first edition, many of you who've got the first edition will know that was endorsed by the Health and Safety Executive, and that was really well achieved by the drafting group at that time, and people like Harry's chairmanship of that was critical. But in approaching the revising of that first edition for the second edition, the drafting group, we went back to the Health and Safety Executive and asked for their support again for the second edition. And it became clear that when we consulted the Health and Safety, the HSE, that engaged with them, that they were really majoring on the workplace aspects of the Health and Safety at Work Act, whereas this second edition of the guidance, the NTSG guidance, as Nev has already explained, we were trying to introduce in a more formal and a more structured way the benefits, balancing the benefits of trees with the risks and the hazards that they present. And so we got quite a way down the road. As Nev said, it's taken about 6 years to do this, and a proportion of that time was spent discussing all these really important issues with the Health and Safety Executive. And it caused some delay in terms of producing the draft to get ready for consultation, but that was necessarily so. And it was an important aspect of what particularly the then chair, Hilary Allison, was really engaged with the HSE on making sure that their concerns were addressed. And it transpired that the HSE's main concern was centered around, in the workplace situations, bad actors using the NTSG guidance to avoid their legal responsibilities in the context of the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, possibly excusing inaction, and that was one of the concerns that they were looking at. So once we came to understand, and Hilary was critical in this, Hilary Allison was critical in dealing with negotiations with the HSE. Once we'd understood what they wanted, we went through, the drafting group went through a process of amending text and re-emphasising the difference between the criminal and the civil law in responses to that HSE discussion. So we've made some significant changes to the draft to do that, with following detailed meetings and discussion with the NTSG drafting group. So I'd just like to re-emphasise that it was Hilary really who made the difference in that, because she met HSE representatives on quite a few occasions and smoothed over, sort of poured oil on troubled waters, as it were. But we got there in the end. And what we were able to do was reintroduce or introduce into the draft the HSE 65, which is its managing for health and safety framework, which is the plan, do, check, act, virtuous circle, really. And that's all about making sure that as a tree owner or a landowner with trees on your land, you go through the processes that the Health and Safety Executive have suggested as being appropriate and the process that's necessary for doing that. So that's in the guidance. So do take note of that. So next slide, please. Thanks, Simon. So as part of that, and as I've mentioned, what we've also done is sort of create a distinction between the criminal law and civil law. And part of that was we would sort of like use that plan, do, check, act, virtuous circle to introduce into this new guidance, the second edition, considering the context of where the trees are and the benefits and the obligations, and then setting those objectives that you want to do as a landowner and a tree owner, and then identify and analyse those risks and do an evaluation, and then introduce specific management. And the guidance is there for you to look at in terms of how you do zoning and what inspections ought to be appropriate and who does that and how you do that. So that was really the biggest change, I think, from the first edition into the second edition, is the introduction of these really important graphics. So next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a bit about benefits from trees, which is section 2. As Nev has already said, the second edition really majored on this. They were in the appendix in the original one, although we thought they were important. What we wanted to do was to put them front and centre, really, and that the benefits in section 2 is really further informed by the Darn research and David Ball's and his colleagues John Watt's research. So that helps guide our understanding of the risk process and how we can balance the risk and hazards presented by trees with the benefits that we all know accrue by having them in our society and in the land and where we work, live and play. So generally, that increased the consideration. There's generally been increased consideration of benefits, not just of trees and woodlands, but also of all green infrastructure has now become mainstream. And in the UK, we've got some specific examples of that. Natural England now have a green infrastructure framework, and they've published green infrastructure standards. One of them is an urban tree canopy cover standard. So government is actually pushing forward with making sure that those benefits of trees and woodlands are really considered at each stage of development and also management as well. We've also got, some of you may know about the biodiversity net gain metric, which was published last year, I think it was, and is now mandatory in the planning system in the UK. And that's really an important, although it's just covering biodiversity, it's a really important sort of, shall we say, benchmark, which shows that we're really taking the benefits of trees seriously. So, and also one of the things which is probably a bit more esoteric is looking at the trees for health and well-being as well, the value of urban trees and woodlands and how those trees and woodlands fit into the culture in our communities. But also we mustn't forget that some of the benefits are included in terms of employment and the economy, particularly in the UK in terms of timber construction and wood processing, but also in terms of environment and biodiversity. So there's climate change, soil protection, water quality, biodiversity, and as was mentioned earlier, the really irreplaceable aspect of ancient and veteran trees. So looking at health and well-being, we can put some numbers on that. We've got 2.1 billion saved in healthcare costs annually, we believe. And London's green spaces are estimated to reduce healthcare costs by about 950 million per annum, with mental health benefits associated with the UK's woodlands visits estimated to be in the region of about 185 million. So really important numbers there, which re-emphasise that when you're looking at managing risk and hazard from trees, you've got to look at what they also deliver for society as well. With a 10% increase in strategically planted trees reduces heating as well, heating and air conditioning costs. And London's urban forest provides an estimated 132.7 million in carbon sequestration over the course of a year. So, and also we mustn't forget that in terms of society, trees and cultural community, 2/3 of respondents to the UK Public Opinion of Forestry Survey 2021 visited forest or woodlands in previous few years. So another aspect is that these places that we're trying to protect with this guidance, the new NTSG guidance, and the trees that make up those places are becoming increasingly important for the public at large. And 36% of those respondents reported an increase in the number of visits in the last 12 months. So really important numbers that going forward, we can really see that making our trees safe in our public spaces and private spaces as well, if you've got public access, but also in our forests and woodlands, is going to be really important going forward. And that's why the NTSG guidance is really going to be critical in actually making sure that people can balance the benefits of those trees with the duty of care that they owe to visitors. I think that's my last slide. So I'm going to introduce the next speaker, please.
Good evening, everybody. It's lovely to be here. I don't work in the tree or land sector myself. I work in risk management, but I must say, I mean, I work across a diversity of topics, but this one has given me much pleasure because trees, I feel, are so important. We couldn't survive without them. So just to go over section 4 and draw out a few of the key points, perhaps Simon could have the next slide, please. There it is. Okay, so what we have here is basically a philosophy. This philosophy is exceedingly widespread because if you look on the internet, you will find that if you type in tolerability of risk and search, you'll come up with this diagram in 10,000 different formats. It's used by numerous sectors all over the place. And I tell my students, if you haven't got a philosophy, you're heading for trouble. the reason for that is because having a philosophy allows you to be consistent in your decision making. So what this diagram basically shows is that as you move up the diagram, the triangle gets wider, and that represents an increasing level of risk. So at the top of the diagram, if you're managing a hazardous situation, you're at the top of the diagram because the risk level is high. The law requires you to do something about it right away. Don't mess about, get on with it, do something, because this level of risk is intolerable. If you lower down the diagram and the risk is not so serious, not of such magnitude, and by the way, I should say, when I'm talking about risk, I'm here talking about the risk of a fatality occurring during a specified time period, say a year. That's my definition of risk. So if the risk is low, then you move down into the tolerable region, or even if it's very low, into the broadly acceptable region. Now, it's worth pointing out that the statistics which have been compiled show that if you work in, say, if you actually work as an employee in forestry, your annual risk of dying, there we've got the table there, that's good. The annual risk of dying is 1 in 12,000 per year. And that's pretty close to the top of this diagram, the unacceptable region. It's just inside it. On the other hand, workplace accidents as a whole are much safer than that. So forestry is a higher risk industry comparatively. Workplace accidents, the risk of dying is 1 in 200,000. In terms of members of the public being killed by a falling tree or branch, the risk is 1 in 15 million per year. This is an incredibly small risk, and I have to say that most people who work in risk management wouldn't spend much time thinking about risks of that magnitude because they're so small and it just isn't worth their time to do that. So we're talking about an incredibly small risk when we're talking about the risk of trees. That's the risk average over the country, of course, and I'm not saying that individual trees don't pose a higher risk on occasion. They will do, but on average, it's very, very small. And that level of risk lies in the broadly acceptable region. What that signifies is that basically the control system which we have in this country for trees is pretty well okay because the level of risk is so small, we're managing it well. And it's unlikely that we'll be able to get the risk any lower than that, whatever we do. Now, in the intermediate region, which is the tolerable region, the law requires that you reduce the risk so far as reasonably practicable. That also applies in the broadly acceptable region. And what you have to do to make decisions, reasonable practicability depends upon looking at two things. One is what control measures you have. So first of all, you say to yourself, well, how much will this control measure reduce the risk? And then secondly, what is the cost and difficulty of applying that control measure? Now, if the benefit, which is the reduction in risk, exceeds the cost and difficulty, then by law, you have to apply that control measure. And if it's the other way around, you may not have to. So that's broadly what the philosophy amounts to. It's common sense philosophy based on reasonable practicability. The HSE have made the point that in individual cases, if you have a dodgy tree, for example, reasonably practicable measures may still be required by law, which is obvious and fair enough. Now, this process, which I've described to you, and this philosophy, is what I would call a non-compensatory decision process. That's an important term because it sounds complicated, but it's very simple. It means that in deciding what you're going to do about some hazard, all you're doing is focusing purely on that hazard and the risk reduction potential for it. You are not thinking of anything else. You're purely focused upon that. Now, most decisions in life and most decisions about trees are what I would call compensatory decisions. I give you an example here. I don't need to introduce this beautiful tree to you, Sycamore Gap. Now, as with all trees, though, that tree at Sycamore Gap posed a risk to people. People would sit under it and have a picnic. They would walk under it, congregate around it. Obviously, it is capable and will or would have at some point shed branches, and so there was inevitably a risk of having that tree there. Now, as we know what happened to the tree, and it was removed at very low cost and with very little difficulty. So you could say, well, that was a reasonably practicable solution. We've avoided that risk. However, we all know the level of outrage which that generated. And it's quite clear that the public is not purely focused upon risk control. They care about other things besides. And Jim has told us about many of those things, and that's actually quite staggering to see the values, the numerical values put upon those benefits. It's overwhelming. So when you're thinking about managing trees, you need to take a compensatory decision process. And what you basically do is you look at the tree and you say, well, what are the benefits associated with this tree? And what are the risks of harm associated with it? And in the compensatory decision process, you do the logical thing. And the logical thing is, if the risks are greater than the benefits, you should apply some control measure. And if it's the other way around, you should not apply the control measure. And that would be in the interests of overall societal good to do that. So as I say, most decisions which are made by organizations and individuals are compensatory decisions. The decisions we make in our everyday life are like that. That's because life is complicated and there are multiple factors involved. This is my last slide. So the guidance I would give to anybody who's managing a hazard, whether it's a tree or something else, would be you really need, especially if you're a significant sized organization, I'm talking about individual householders here, but you should have a policy document which sets out your philosophy. And I've described the TOR philosophy to you, and I've talked about compensatory decision making. So those things would feature in that philosophy. And then you need to have a management system which is in accord with the philosophy. Obviously, it's got to be consistent. And the benefits of this are threefold, I would say. It protects people from unacceptable risks. I just point out that we're not providing total safety because the tolerability of risk philosophy does not require you to do that. It requires you just to reduce risks so far as reasonably practicable. The second benefit is that it protects trees from excessive maintenance or felling. And I think that's really important because most of the time we talk about protecting the public from trees, but I've come to think that actually we need also to be thinking about protecting trees from ourselves, from human beings. In fact, there's a feedback loop because we obviously depend on trees for our existence. the ecosystem would not survive without trees. And then finally, if you have a policy and a management system in place, and if you are enacting that management system, you've obviously got to do what you say, then you should be able to minimize the likelihood of you being held liable when inevitable incidents occur. Incidents will continue to occur, there's no question about that, but they will be few and far between, as we've seen from the statistics. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I wish I'd been taught by you when I was younger, but we've foregone that opportunity. I'm sorry about that. My name's Richard Stead. I'm a bit of an outsider in that I'm a lawyer without any background in arboriculture. I came into contact with the NTSG following the case of Poll in 2017. And in Poll, I acted for the claimant. So it's probably fair to say that I've always had a slight sense of guilt. However, in preparing for this webinar, I did look back at Poll, and I have to say that I doubt the outcome would be any different today because of the specific facts of that case. More importantly, however, Poll appeared to trigger a widespread view that roadside trees should be removed in order to avoid the risk of potential claims posed by such trees. And it was that provided the motive for the NTSG to search for a more balanced approach to the actual risk of injury posed by trees. Can I go to the first slide? We have that up already. Good. Let me start by talking about criminal prosecution following structural failure of a tree. There is potential criminal liability under Section 33 and Section 3.1 of the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, which may give rise to criminal prosecution in the most serious cases. And we have a recent example of the Cheshire East Council case leading to a fine of £500,000. The landscape for such prosecutions has not changed since the first edition of the NTSG. The best defense in reality against such potential liabilities is ensuring that appropriate systems are in place, such as those advanced by NTSG in its various scenarios. The courts also recognise that the HSE SIM sets a minimum standard of inspection for trees, since it is the benchmark for prosecutions under the 1974 Act. Could I have the next slide, please? So turning from criminal prosecution to civil liability, as you're all well aware, there is potential for a civil claim being brought in negligence or nuisance. Such a claim is a far more likely outcome of any structural failure of a tree as opposed to a criminal prosecution. The 5 principles set out in the case of Stagecoach and Hind are unchanged since the first edition. And indeed, they have now been endorsed in the Court of Appeal decision in Whitley Parish Council. Let me remind you of the first 2 principles, because I think they're worth repeating and don't always get the observation they deserve. And they start by saying the owner of a tree owes a duty to act as a reasonable and prudent landowner. Such a duty must not amount to an unreasonable burden, or for the landowner to act as the insurer of nature. That he has a duty to act where there is a danger which is apparent to him and which he can see with his own eyes. The principles then carry on to continue to focus on inspection, but the recognition that the landowner is not an insurer of nature is important and can become lost in all the detail of the argument in respect of inspection. Since the first edition, there are recent examples where those principles have been applied, and just picking one, Hoyle and Hampshire County Council. Well, that concerned a cherry tree growing on Highway Authority land, which fell onto a passing car in heavy rain and high wind. The court found no evidence of an obvious or visible defect, such as might have invited further investigation. The council had in place a system of monthly driven highway inspections, with those inspectors having received tree hazard awareness training. That included highway inspections of roadside trees, and then also an inspection every 3 years by an arboriculturist. In the case of Hoyle, there was also a claim under Section 41 of the Highways Act 1980 for failure to maintain the highway. That cause of action failed since the court decided that the roadside tree was not part of the fabric of the highway, and that supports the previous decision in 2019 in Kolar and Highways England. In Hoyle, there was also a claim under the Occupiers Liability Act 1957, but that was in fact rightly abandoned in my view, since the driver of a vehicle on a road is not a visitor, but is on the road by right. Hence, you have no cause of action under the Act arising in these particular scenarios of accidents occurring when somebody's driving a car on a road. The case of Hoyle also highlighted the contrast between the duties of care owed by landowners and professionals. In the case of Hoyle, there was a claim against an arboriculturist as well as against the Highway Authority. And it was alleged that the professional did not apply the standard of care of the ordinary skilled tree inspector. The claim, in fact, failed on the facts of the case. But it's important that one should note the difference between the duty of the landowner being such as could reasonably be expected of a reasonable, prudent landowner, and then the duty of the professional, which is to apply the standard of the ordinarily skilled tree inspector, arboriculturist, whatever, as was described in the case of Parker and the National Trust. So it's worthwhile bearing that in mind whenever you're looking at responsibility for any structural failure of a tree, depending upon who is involved. So by way of comment, and I make this comment simply as a bystander and someone who's not directly involved in the task of tree inspection, but my experience as a lawyer in tree cases shows that highway authorities are not consistent in their inspection regimes. Some authorities have drive-by inspections, including observation of obvious tree defects. Others do not. Some do not give training to highway inspectors in recognizing visible defects in trees. Most do, but again, some do not. Some do not have set periods for inspections by arboriculturists. Others do. And some authorities inspect all their trees within falling distance of the road. Some only inspect such trees growing on highway land. So you have a variety of approaches, and that raises some concern. Let me stress that councils don't have to apply the same systems. Obviously, councils have different individual requirements and resources, but they must be able to justify departure from the inspection regime of the types used by Hampshire County Council in Hoyle, or from the type set out in NTSG Scenario 5 relating to County Council and highway authorities. NTSG has provided the guidance. It's up to landowners to implement that guidance and adapt it, if necessary, to their own personal circumstances. There is obviously a need for landowners of all types to be aware of the NTSG guidance that applies to their situation, and that applies as much to homeowners and farmers who may not always be aware of the NTSG guidance. Lastly, I should say that as a lawyer, I can vouch for the fact that the courts, including the Court of Appeal, are fully aware of the NTSG guidance, which has been referred to as a benchmark ever since Hyde and Stagecoach in 2014, along with other publications by well-known bodies such as the Forestry Commission. The NTSG has also been recognised and highlighted by government in the recent parliamentary debate on tree maintenance by local authorities. All of that simply goes to show that, to me as an outsider, the NTSG has achieved a huge amount in a very short period of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Good evening, everybody. I've been the person driving the PowerPoint, and I'm aware that everybody's been slightly frustrated because when they asked me to change a slide, there's a lag of a few seconds before it comes through. So I'm going to have the same problem because it'll be instant on my screen in front of me, but I'll be aware that you're waiting a few seconds for each slide to appear. So I'm here to chat about section 6, entitled Reasonable Balanced Tree Risk Management. And that is broadly the same as the section in edition 1, which was actually chapter 4. And the headings in that section are again broadly similar to how they were in first edition, talking about balance and proportionality, responsible management, terminology, setting out a framework for managing trees for public safety, and then covering safety assessment and risk assessment, and trying to convert that into practical management guidance. One of the first things to say, and I know it's obvious when you think about it, but not everybody does think about it, every tree structure that we see is going to fail eventually, whether catastrophically or very slowly, bit by bit, over tens or hundreds of years. But every tree structure that we can see now, sooner or later, won't be there. And that's part of the concept of trees being organic structures. They're part of nature, and they're not engineered. Equally, we know as arboriculturists, and again, not all general public would recognize this, but we cannot guarantee any tree to be safe. However much inspection we give to it, however carefully we look at it, there is no absolute guarantee of safety. And as several people have said already this evening, we cannot expect to go for zero risk. There will always be risk, and we live with risk all the time. But the efforts that we've made over the last couple of decades or many decades to improve the dangers, or to reduce the dangers from tree failure, the current practices that we have contributed to this acknowledged very low overall risk. And by doing that, we've been engaged with reasonable care, reasonable likelihood assessments, and reasonable practicability. And this just reflects really what David and Richard and others have been saying this evening, is we are using common sense in order to come to these decisions. The management action that we take has to be proportionate to the risk, and that will sometimes involve proactive and sometimes reactive management actions. So the framework for managing trees hasn't really changed overall from the first edition. The starting point is zoning, identifying levels of occupancy in a particular area, recognizing that there are target areas around and under trees, and using a system of increasing intensity of checks and inspections, starting with informal procedures through to formal procedures, and recognizing that the competency required for those also increases in intensity with the level of detail of those inspections. And that also reflects in the frequency by which we need to come back to look at trees again. So the aim of this is to manage risks at an acceptable level. What we've also included in, and we've emphasized quite a bit in the second edition, is that in reducing risks, we don't have necessarily to remove trees or fell them, but there are other methods for reducing risk, such as managing access and reducing access to trees that are important trees that need to be maintained. We spent quite a bit of time. We have effectively rewritten the whole of that section, even though it has much of the same content in it. It's been rewritten, and it also includes quite a few clarifications around terminology. One of the significant areas of feedback that we got in the consultation was the need to ensure that we're consistent in the terminology that we use. And so we concentrated quite a lot on that. Terms such as hazard and harm and risk are pretty much defined, and they haven't really changed. We look quite carefully at defect, because that is a term that's bandied around and used quite inappropriately from time to time. And we came up with a definition for defect, which is that it's a feature or a condition or a feature that would predispose a tree or a part of tree to structural failure. So it's recognizing it's not just something that we think looks a bit dodgy, but the defect would actually predispose the tree to fail. And that leads on to obvious defect, which is a term used frequently in court cases in terms of trying to decide whether or not there was negligence. And if it's an obvious defect, then it's a defect that any normal person would expect to be able to recognize. The term target is still used. We've kept it in as it's used very commonly in our sector. In a way, it's a slightly unfortunate phrase, because it suggests that there's some intention about those people that might be damaged by a falling tree, but obviously that's not the purpose of it. So we still use target in the same way that it was used previously. And then informal, the informal checks and inspections are described as incidental day-to-day observations. And this is a really important tenet of the NTSG, that all the people that move around the countryside that are involved with their day-to-day activities all have an opportunity to observe when a tree condition may change, and those people that see trees every day are by far the most likely people to notice those changes. So the informal tree observations are a really important first base, if you like, for informing duty holders of something that might need to be looked at. But as well as informal, obviously there is a requirement for formal checks and inspection. And under that heading, we have specifically identified the word checks as opposed to inspection. And this was brought up because the HSE SIM that David and Richard both mentioned is an important document, as it guides the HSE inspectors in what they should do in terms of the thresholds for considering prosecution. But they use the word checks as well as inspection. So it was important that we also reflect that in the guidance. And there's a specific section in section 6 that talks about that, and doesn't try to delineate a difference in definition particularly, but recognizes that both terms are used. And then the normal inspection leads on to detailed inspection, which obviously requires a more higher level of competence. Again, we identify special trees, which might be ancient veteran trees, but also trees of cultural or heritage importance as well. And, you know, those are the sorts of trees where more attention, more time needs to be given to considering how we can manage them if it's assumed that they pose a risk. Tree safety assessment processes, as we've said, involve formal assessments, and that's presented really as an increasing level of attention. So drive-by assessments are useful in identifying things that might need further attention. They, of course, can't provide a detailed feedback report, but they give the opportunity to identify areas that need further investigation. The standard walkover VTA assessments are by far the greatest proportion of tree inspections carried out, and some of those will raise concerns leading to detailed formal assessments. And as I said, the competence required to carry out those varying levels of assessments increases as it becomes more detailed. We briefly talk about recording, and particularly we talk about negative recording, which is really for tree safety assessment is the standard approach, which basically means that you're only needing to keep detailed notes of trees that require, that raise concern or require further action. Overall, the risk assessment has to be prioritized. I think it was Jim perhaps that said there were something like 3 billion trees to choose from. And if we're going to find those ones that are likely to cause damage, we have to look for serious and imminent risk as the most important, you know, activator. The NTSG guidance is mostly aimed at duty holders. It provides very useful reference for arboriculturists and others in the sector. But in its first instance, it's there to provide guidance for duty holders. And it's really important that those duty holders have ownership and agency. And one of the things that really sort of came out of the NTSG's work and discussions was recognizing that the owners are probably best placed to assess occupancy levels. You don't need an arboriculturist to do that for you. You, as the person that lives in that place, are the best placed person to make those judgments. If, as a result of the assessment, whether that be informal or formal, if that presents trees that are presenting a risk, then there's an approach of a hierarchy, if you like, of actions that you could take, which starts off by recognizing that the benefits of the trees are such that ideally we don't want to take any trees away, and therefore restricting site access would be the first stage. And there are various ways of achieving that, as are listed in the bullet points here. If that's not possible, then pruning may be an option for reducing the risk. And ultimately, at the end of that list is removal. Yeah. I'm going to just drift into section 7 of the guidance, because this is a new section that was brought in for the second edition. And it's about giving a simple guidance to decision making. And there are 2 flow charts that are included. One for the duty under civil law, for example, a homeowner occupier who does not have health and safety at work responsibilities. And the second is a duty under criminal law, which would apply to employers and self-employed in relation to health and safety at work. In principle, both of these decision-making structures follow the same pattern, starting off with assessing site occupancy. If it's low site occupancy, then there's no requirement to do anything, and you can return back to scheduling the next review. If site occupancy is high, then you would follow down that route which asks, first of all, whether the duty holder is confident to do that check themselves or whether they would bring in help from somewhere else. And if there are no concerning defects to worry about, you would return back to scheduling the next review. And if there were concerns, you would follow through that route, possibly employing a tree specialist and carrying out any required work. For the criminal law diagram, the pattern is really very similar, and it starts off in the same way and it follows through to a very similar process. The difference here is identifying who is responsible for what, and of course the duty holder starts that process but invites other people to get involved, first of all doing initial checks and if necessary employing an experienced professional arboricultural specialist. Importantly, if whatever guidance is advised or intervention that might be advised from that level to the duty holder, it is back to the duty holder who has the ultimate responsibility for making that choice of action or not. The advice in the middle is part of the process, but it's the duty holder that holds the ultimate decision-making position. We're grateful to Jeremy Barrell for both of these diagrams. They came originally from an article that he produced, and we worked with him to ensure that he agreed with the content of them, and we're grateful to his input there. So that's it from me. I'm now going to pass over to Andy, who's going to talk about the scenarios in section 7.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I think some of you may have been confused slightly by the site occupancy in that previous slide. And I think that, so for instance, if you've got a small private garden, but you've got a tree overhanging a road, then that site occupancy is obviously high. Okay, so yeah, I'm Andy Tipping, and I helped with the original NTSG way back when, and I've helped a little bit on this new version. Okay, section 7 of the NTSG document has 9 scenarios in it. And I think these are the ones, this is possibly the section that will be the most fun, where people will go and take a look, see which one reflects their either workplace or advice that they're giving people, or sort of simply for themselves. I'm a local authority tree officer, so for me it's generally the local authority ones that interest me the most. But the ones that are there in yellow, district or borough council, large open space open to the general public, and small sited mature trees growing next to the footway, probably after stagecoach versus hind, are new scenarios in there. So it's really straightforward. You know, if you wanted to go and have a look through them and see which one applied to you, and then yeah, take the advice in there. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Simon. Okay. So the scenarios have 5 elements in each, one of which is the ownership or control of management, access, the benefits of trees. Why have you got your trees, and what do you what are they there for? Why do you value them? Why do you want to keep them, for instance? And then we go into the natural living organisms element of it, understanding disease, but trees also, you know, the benefits of, again, the biodiversity of it, and then coming up with a strategy then to manage it. And this goes from a single householder right up to, you know, Hampshire County Council, for instance. People are in charge of thousands of miles of roads, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of trees. And assessing those 5 elements are relatively not straightforward, but can be done there. And oh, no, you've slipped me. Sorry. Can I go back to the previous slide, please? Okay.
I'm really sorry, Andy. I was trying to preempt you.
Sorry. Oh, I was going to set a timer. I won't overrun. I promise you.
And the strategy is an interesting one because, we talk about zoning. I mean, I put that photograph in there because how do you zone that tree? That was a big dead tree in a park in Barnet, a willow overhanging the Northern Line with a tube train running underneath it when I took that photograph. That was just, we had it down as soon as we possibly could. But we have got a number of trees that overhang train lines, for instance, A roads and motorways. So, we have zoned those slightly differently from the rest of our trees. The element of competence is really important, I think. We have a database, obviously, where we keep all our thing in. And my last baby there that I always say, whenever they were talking about policy, I think Richard mentioned it. David Ball mentioned it earlier. Having a policy in place is so important. You can demonstrate to people how you're working, what you do, what you won't do, and everyone can see it. It's front facing, it's public facing, but it also then works within. Again, coming from a council, works within your own local authority. You can tell other departments what you would and might do on their behalf. So take those things into account. There's been a couple of court cases recently that I think are worth focusing on. Okay. So this is Parker, not that Parker, but Parker versus National Trust. And what happened here was a limb from a horse chestnut tree fell and caused serious injury. The National Trust had adopted a formal system of inspection as set out in the National Tree Safety Group. They had zoning, they closed parks and high bins, they did post-storm damage inspections. The case was dismissed. The tree had no obvious defects, well, apart from bleeding canker. But they had a policy in place, and I think they mentioned the National Tree Safety Group in their policy. They were following the principles of the NTSG. They were in a defendable position. So the HSC decided to take them to court, but the judge threw it out because they had a policy in place. They followed the principles of NTSG. Okay. And then this is a far more recent one, and there's a number of points in this slide. This was debated in Parliament only 3 weeks ago. And what happened was Cheshire East Council will fine £500,000. That's important in itself because it's the fines seem to be increasing when local authorities are found negligent under the Section 3 of the Health and Safety Work Act. For instance, the Wirral, I think they were fined 115,000 or something like that. So I think that the fines are going up, which is in lots of ways very good. But the second part of that, and again, Richard might be able to help me here if he's still around. The contractor was only fined £5 with that fatality. And what I have said there, and what I understand, and I may be right or wrong, is that you can't outsource your risk. Okay. That you may employ someone to inspect your trees for you. They may have professional indemnity and public liability insurances. They're qualified, but if a fatality or serious injury happens, you don't expect to be able to say to the contractor, you're liable because you're not. So anyway, again, going back to this particular case, they had no tree strategy in place. The tree shed emerged in the year before, and it wasn't acted on. It was put forward, and in Parliament, the minister stated that the NTSG is national guidance, and the advice is that it should be adopted in tree strategies or policies. So let me go to my panel slide. And again, this is me focusing on local authority and tree officers here. We're the experts on tree safety, but we're not responsible for it. So tree officers get paid whatever they do, 40 grand a year, and generally shoulder I think they're shouldering the responsibility, I think. They go out there and they try as best as they can to make sure their trees are safe. They manage contractors to do this work. But at the end of the day, they're not responsible for tree safety within the councils that they work for. If they feel and look through the scenarios that your resourcing levels are satisfactory, that you can be proactive in your inspection regimes, that you've got a good team that have got decent qualifications, they come to work, then again, I would push for a policy that's where get a policy published. If, however, your resourcing levels are not satisfactory, what I would say then is to ensure that you bring this to management attention. And we've got a picture of the Shawshank Redemption here, which is I don't know if you've seen the film, but anyway, I will do it very quickly. When he's in prison, he writes to the state governor asking for books and books to create a library in the prison. And he does it every year, and he never gets an answer. And then all of a sudden, Monday, a whole Arctic load of books show up, and they open up a library at Shawshank. I think if you haven't got the resources necessary for where you work, you should bring it to your manager's attention. He gets paid a lot more money than you do, and certainly the director does, and the chief exec. And you keep that recording, and if you don't get anywhere, then you do it again the next year or 6 months later, or whatever you think. But I would press to say that if you feel like you're taking it on your own shoulders, you're under-resourced, and you're worried about the level of safety of the trees in local authority where you work, you've got to push it upstairs. You may be frightened to do that or think you're causing trouble or whatever. But again, you're the expert on the safety, and you're slightly being undermined in my opinion. Yeah, so make sure you push it upstairs. Okay, I think that's me.
Thank you, Andy. Can everyone hear me? I've had to relocate. You can't see me because there's a little thing on my little thing. Can you see me?
Yeah, you're good.
Perfect. I had to relocate earlier on because my Wi-Fi stopped working, so now I've got a dog on my lap. So excuse me if I'm sitting awkwardly. Right, so that's the end. Well done, everybody. That was great. We had more than 800 people, I think, watching that, and there's still 760 odd people watching. So you must have all done something right. We've had loads of questions. We are definitely not going to get through all of them. So please, everybody, don't be sad if I don't ask your question. Statistically, I probably won't ask your question, but we will make sure all the questions are sent to all the presenters afterwards, and then we can see if anything grabs their attention. But I did mark down a few things. Many of you didn't target your question at anyone in particular, so we're just going to have to throw them out there. And one I liked was from Paul. Paul said, the documentation produced is a great benefit to the ARB industry, but what has been done to share this information with the masses? Would a wider collaboration with local councils, TV, media be possible? I think it's a really good point. This is stuff like this. We're managing to communicate the importance of this document to our sector and to the forestry sector as well, and to other related sectors. What about those tree owners out there? How are they going to find out about this? Someone, you can put your hand up. We said we were going to do it that way, didn't we? So who wants to take that question? I will pick someone if you don't put your hand up. It's your own time you're wasting. Simon. Oh, Neville's put his hand up. Nev, go for it.
Yeah, it's an important point. I mean, when we're heading in the run-up to find out whether NTSG was a thing, was it something the sector supported, we in my practice, we ran a series of conferences called the Future Tree Risk Management, and that was before we found out what the appetite was within the sector, if you like, for some common view. What was the common purpose? Second thing was how many. I mean, we are tree experts, or tree enthusiasts and experts amongst us. But we're not risk experts, we're not legal experts, and so in the run-up to all of those series of seminars and conferences, which culminated in what Harry was describing in 2008, was the Royal Geographical Society, where 350 odd people turned up, and the mandate came across because of the voting system we had there, that actually this was something that was wanted, was needed. But at that conference, there were also the HSE and the policy division, also the regulators and, if you like, the investigators also were there. So it was a very broad spectrum of engagement with very open minds, and also people from community groups and people with particular concerns about the benefits of trees in their neighborhoods and so on. So quite a long journey to get to the first edition. The second edition was kind of, I have to say, we haven't got this big head of steam working within the sector saying, what are we going to do to get a reasonable and balanced, proportionate approach to tree risk management, putting all these factors in and getting the kind of expertise involved in informing us of what's a reasonable approach. Having got there, I think it's the sector itself that needs to mobilise. NTSG aren't a campaigning body. We don't have very much in the way of resources. An awful lot of the work, huge amount of the work, has been done in our good time, our own time, and so on. So I'm afraid I can't fully answer the question of how we can really bring this out to the public in a better way, other than through our sector to picking it up and engaging more fully with it.
Thank you, Nev. Andy, you've got a comment on that as well.
Yeah, well, we did when we did the first edition, we created a householder leaflet, and the idea was, I think, that the ambition was for it to be in one of those little things in home base and B&Q where you had to paint a wall or something, and it would be there for people to be able to pick up on their way out of a home base or something like that, so they could just keep it at home and read it whenever. Now, we didn't produce a householder leaflet for this edition, but for the last one we did. And how successful that was, I don't know. I think that was the question, wasn't it? How do we bring this to a broader audience?
Yeah, absolutely. And someone did actually ask whether or not we collectively, all of us, were going to produce a householder leaflet. So it's interesting you've said that. I'm not sure whether that's an option for the future or not. I'm sure that's something that the group could discuss. And of course, if you want to take it to a wider audience, you can buy a printed copy for £30 from the Arboricultural Association bookshop, and you can give it to loved ones at Christmas. So why not think about that? Nothing so lovely like a copy of NTSG. Nev?
Well, also, I think Simon might want to say something about the website. I mean, the website has been revamped, and it is it's much more accessible. Also, the data that's been collected, which the evidence base for our knowledge is improved, and thanks, I've mentioned it several times. Mark Daniels has diligently kept this record. If I can just say that the amount of work that's gone behind that is quite substantial, but part of the problem is that the actual mortality and injuries, serious injuries from trees. I know it's terrible when it happens, and as Harry was saying, that's part of the rarity, is part of the reason why it's so big when it does happen.
I'm coming.
Sorry? Yeah. So I just finish this point, that essentially accident and emergency departments don't keep data on injuries from trees. And that part of the reason for that is that there's not, there are insufficient injuries, if you like. And that's, that this is, we have to get a perspective on that. So, yeah, bit of background.
Thank you, Nev. Caroline had her hand up and has now disappeared from what I can see. So I'll go to Simon, who's also got the hand up, and then we'll see if Caroline comes back.
Okay, thanks. I just want to acknowledge first of all that it is a difficulty, and there is a huge competition to get anybody's thoughts and ideas out in front of the general population. But I was going to also say that the website is now a really good resource. It provides really clear information, and that's obviously accessible to anybody. But to get people to that website, I guess the ideal would be a nice big Sunday Times article, perhaps, to highlight it. I've recently done an interview with ProArb, but that's in a way it's talking to ourselves again, and we're in the bubble. But if there's the opportunity to have the opportunity to be interviewed by one of the big nationals, for example, then I think that really would get out there and make a difference.
Thank you, Simon. Caroline definitely had a hand up and has a hand up, but I'm seeing 3 dots instead of Caroline.
Oh, I am here.
Oh,
And I
perfect.
did have a hand up, and then somebody knocked on the door, which is really rude. In the first one, we produced a landowner leaflet as well. And just reading through all the chat, there was a guy that said about that he feels that some of the larger landowners are not aware. Now that concerns me greatly, because certainly those landowners that have trees and have foresters should be aware of it. But again, it's engaging with the bodies like the NFU and the CLA and those wider landowner organisations who may not be fond of trees but should really be aware of the risk. And it's again, how do we tell our story to the wider landscape?
Thank you very much. Okay, one thing I'll address quickly. We always have this question. Lots and lots of people are asking, will the webinar be available to watch again later? Yes, webinars are recorded. They'll appear on the Arboricultural Association's website within the next week or so, something like that. So yes, CEUs, I think if you signed up for a certificate when you registered, you should get CEUs automatically done. But if you don't, then come and complain at me in a couple of days. But let's make that a future John problem. Question from Simon. Simon has asked, you mentioned the HSE earlier on, but Simon specifically asked if it can be confirmed that the HSE have endorsed this second edition, and if so, to what extent they've endorsed it. So the HSE has been mentioned, but if you give us a bit more on that. Jim's put his hand up straight away.
Yeah, we didn't get the full endorsement that we got for the first document. If you look at the first document, it actually says it's endorsement. And just for people's clarification, there's a difference between an endorsement and supporting what we did, sort of thing. And we've got we engaged strongly with the HSE and made significant changes to the draft. And Hilary Allison was certainly instrumental in actually achieving that. And we think we've done in terms of making the changes that we wanted to. And we now have, shall we say, alignment with the HSE's take on how these issues and sort of tree management issues for people who have trees on their land should be dealt with, so that they can fulfil their duty of care on both civil and criminal law.
Thanks, Jim. Nev, you had your hand up next.
Oh, you're on mute, Nev.
You're muted, Nev.
Better. Yeah, it became apparent the HSE's system of endorsement and stratification of it is different than it was last time. And over the years, it's changed. So we worked hard on this, and Hilary, as Jim was saying, did a lot of kind of background work on it. And what we have is I'll read it to you. On the club page, if you like, of the guide, full document, it says the Health and Safety Executive was consulted in the production of this publication. It sets out sensible, proportionate, reasonable, and balanced advice for people with responsibilities for managing the risk from trees. That is the statement the HSE gave us to put in the document. It doesn't, as Jim says, use the word endorse. And there's a tension there, I think, because we had, and David and I and us as a whole have talked a lot about this, that we the HS, because we talk about the general risk from trees being extremely low, which is they also talk about in the HSE Sector Information 2007-2013 and revision. They use the word extremely low, but they say that's not a reason, as Andy was saying, not to have any policy or strategy for managing trees. And what they're looking out for is, as with Cheshire East, is those organisations that don't have anything, don't acknowledge their responsibility in that sort of way. And so there was quite a lot of pushback that we should be extremely careful how we use that the statistics in our document, because that we don't encourage what they call the bad actor. Anyway, we got past that, but those were the kind of part of the discussions that we had.
Thank you, Nev. Simon, you had your hand up briefly. Are you covered with that now? Are you?
I was just going to say what Nev said. So
Marvelous. Thank you. I was almost going to cut it short then, but I just saw a question in from Ian, who asked what I think is a good question. Ian has asked, was the insurance industry involved in the development of the guidance? And if not, were they invited to participate?
Yeah, I can have a go, if that's okay.
Sure.
The NFU were involved in the first edition, not in the edition itself, but in meetings. One of the things that was said was that the level of risk and cost to the insurance industry was not sufficient to warrant an engagement. And whereas the level of risk from subsidence in terms of, I mean, they're talking about cash and profit and expenditure risk to them from subsidence is much higher. So I hope David's also got some points to make, I think. David?
Yeah, am I loud and clear? Well, yeah, two quick things. I think that statement from the HSE was pretty good, actually, and I wouldn't worry too much about not having an endorsement, whatever that means, however that's interpreted. And the other thing is, regarding the insurance sector, I also work with the National Play Safety Forum, and they're concerned with playground safety and accidents on playgrounds, very similar to what NTSG is concerned about, but different issue. And they've, for years, tried to get the insurance sector involved in that, and it's been very difficult. Occasionally they have sent someone along, but it's never been possible to get them fully involved because they don't see it as of significant importance for them. So it's difficult getting insurance people in. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Much appreciated. Okay. I am going to ask a question. I don't normally give in to sort of begging, but Simon, a different Simon to the previous question, is now begging me to ask this question. So Simon, I will just for you. Simon says, would the NTSG consider encouraging the ARB Association to adopt a risk framework such as QTRA, TRAC, Valid, or a new system, such that we could progress to a national standard framework of tree risk assessment? So has this documented the way it's done and what the NTSG have found out as they've looked into it? Would the NTSG then sort of lobby the ARB Association to adopt or promote, I suppose, one of those systems? A slightly odd question because two of us work for the ARB Association, but would anyone like to tackle that at all?
I'll have a go. Anyone else want to tackle it? I'm happy to kick it all. Oh, Simon, you want to do it? I don't.
I wouldn't say I want to do it. I think we faced the issue of how prescriptive the NTSG guidance should be in the first edition, and when it was published, there was some criticism that we hadn't been prescriptive enough. And the NTSG's position on that is pretty clear, which is that the variations are so great and the difference of context is so great in so many different situations that to try to make a rule that works for everybody is bound to fail. And that therefore the approach of the guidance is to talk about principles and policy, and then the duty holder has the responsibility of applying that. And in the second edition, we haven't really changed that position. It's the same. In terms of whether we as a sector could ever get to a point where we all agree to get behind one form of risk assessment, I think we are just not ready for that. We're not yet mature enough, or it may be that we'll never be sure enough and confident enough to be able to say that there's one system that works better than any other system and would be the only system that could be used. Well, we talked about this in lots of different contexts, but we need to remember that we are still quite a young industry. We're still developing, we're still learning huge amounts all the time about trees and our relationship with trees. And so I don't think it would be a helpful thing for the Arbor Association or any other body to try to impose one tree risk assessment system.
Thank you, Simon. Nev and Jim both got your hands up. I'm not sure who was first. Sorry, it doesn't tell
Jim,
me that.
what do you want to do?
I think you were first, Nev, so go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure it's our role. And also, it in a sense, and I really pick up on what and agree with what Simon's saying about the NTSG is not prescriptive. It provides the basis for, and as David said, the philosophy and practice of how to go about sensible, well-balanced management, taking benefit risk into consideration and so on. I think we moved an incredible distance in terms of the kind of people who have been working in this field for quite a long time in terms of training and guidance and so on. But I don't think it's our role to endorse one against the other. I mean, if we found something that was inappropriate, I think our job should be to talk to them or talk about it. There's one other thought I had, which I think David might be able to help with, and that is the Treasury Green Book, which is kind of gives the framework whereby we spend money on things and things that are to do with policy and change and so on. And I think I'd like to know a bit more about that in terms of how a sector then does self-governance about in terms of identifying something which is like a gold standard in something. I'm not sure that's where we are.
Jim.
Yeah, just briefly to add to what Simon and Neville have just said, I really don't think it's the NTSG's position to get behind one particular system or another. We've set our stall out, and I'm sure if Sir Harry had still been on the call, speaking from the sort of the broader forestry and woodland sector part of the discussion, that it would be counterproductive, I think. And what you might find is people, as we saw with, you may remember, as we saw with ash dieback, people precipitatively removing trees because they were worried about issues with ash dieback and that sort of thing. And if we start having a system which ratifies, I suppose, on what I'm trying to say is it would be difficult for the NTSG to go along with getting behind one system that then put in place those sorts of assessments that would create problems. I think we have to remember that the NTSG was set up when British Standard tried to implement an assessment for tree inspections, and that was decided. The British Standard decided not to go forward with that. So I think we're in a good place now. The NTSG guidance is in a good place. It's getting referenced, and something that would. It wouldn't, as I say, I don't think it's the NTSG's position to get behind one particular system or another.
Thanks, Jim. David, you had your hand up for that one as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very happy that a non-prescriptive approach has been taken by the NTSG. And I point out that the Health and Safety at Work Act is also non-prescriptive. And the philosophy behind the Act, one of the strands of it is self-regulation, which means that the duty holder ultimately decides what needs to be done. So I think we should stick with that as much as we can. Now, there is a problem, and I've come across this in other sectors, in that we have things like British and European standards and international standards which are being written and churned out by the score. And the problem with those is that what they do is, I mean, I'm working on an international standard at the moment. It is dominated by people from China. They're writing a standard which is going to impact upon the UK with almost no UK input to it. It means that decisions about how we manage our lives are being taken away and given to people who have no idea what our circumstances or our requirements are, what our situation is. So I'm really very keen that we stay with the self-regulation thing as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Well, look, I know we've got loads of questions outstanding. We have come long beyond actually when we're supposed to end, but I am going to abuse my position to ask my question that I want to ask. We're going to rattle through our speakers really quickly, and I'm going to see if anyone would like to tell us their favourite tree or maybe risk-related book. Who wants to go first?
Oh, I'll go first. I'll go first. Okay. So it's not it's my newest book. So I think it's going to be my favourite book. And it is The New Silver by Gabriel Henry, and such beautiful illustrations by Sarah Simblett. So I think that's going to be my new favourite book ever.
Fantastic choice. Thank you. I'm seeing if we can get through this without anyone saying an NTSG publication. David, you're next.
Oh, thank you. Well, I can't think immediately of a book because I got a terrible memory for titles, but I did watch a video a couple of days ago, half an hour on YouTube, about why Scotland has got so few trees and why we need to do something about it. You can easily find it, just log in Scotland and trees and you'll get it. And I thought it was wonderful. Trees will grow in Scotland if they're allowed to.
Very interesting. Thank you, David. Neville, I think you might have been next.
Yeah, can I do two?
Of course you can do two.
Okay. I mean, I've got lots of, factual books, if you like, or textbooks, or, very serious books and stuff. But a book that Caroline Davis basically she was clearing out years ago, probably a decade. She may have forgotten she's done it. Gave me, and it's John Fowles' The Tree. Beautiful book. It's a piece of wonderful literature, and saying actually, there's no way science can understand a tree. It has to have, the human artist and creative soul behind it that goes a little way to acknowledge that relation. It's a lovely book. The other is I just started reading. I don't know if anyone's read her, Elif Shafak, who's Turkish British writer, I came across a book some time ago called "There Are Rivers in the Sky." Stunning piece of, stunning novel.
I'm with you on that, Nev.
She's written the other book, which I kind of halfway through. It's called The Island of Missing Trees. Happens to be trees, and I can't recommend it highly enough. It's about Cyprus and people who are displaced and communities are, and what the role of trees is in those people's lives, and particularly when they are involved in having to move away from what is their home and stuff. Just a lovely book.
Brilliant, thank you.
There's others. We'll have to stop.
Yeah. Perfect. Simon, you had your hand up next, and I'm going to start picking on people who haven't put their hands up. Simon.
Well, I've chosen a book which I read about a year ago, and I still find myself thinking about it quite intensely. And it's, I guess, not entirely just about trees, but it's about nature and a mixture of understanding the evolution of nature and aligning that with some of the ancient wisdoms of humankind. And the book is called The Web of Meaning, and the author is Jeremy Lent. And I highly recommend it.
Lovely. We're getting some good stuff tonight. Jim.
Okay, I've actually got it with me. This is it's the book, and it's rather tangential, but it's The Sword in the Stone by T.H. White, and I read it when I was 9 years old, and this is the actual book. And what did it for me was the bit where the wolf meets Merlin in the forest, in the woods, and that's what switched me onto trees, I think, when I was a young kid. Apart from climbing them, so that magical element of woodlands and trees, etc. So that's my favourite book.
Fantastic, love it. Who have we got left? So Andy and Richard, I think, are left. Who wants to go? Assuming you've got one, you don't have to have one. It's fine.
Well, I'll run with one. I'm afraid Neville's rather taken my pitch with Ellis Shafak, who is brilliant. But so I'm going to have to fall back on my youth and go to the Woodlanders, I think.
Nice, classic.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Tipping.
I didn't know this was about tree books. I was just asking my favourite book. So I
Say any book. Nobody, we never prepare this anyway. What's your favourite book? That's what I meant to ask. Go, Andy.
I've got two. Non-fiction is Football Against the Enemy by Simon Cooper, and fiction, which I'll rarely read, probably Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk.
That's a great book. Not many trees in it, but that is it. That is a great book.
Oh, and Overstory. I did do Overstory, so there you go. There's a tree.
Overstory is quite good.
Perfect. Fighting, football, trees. It's everything. It's all there. That's amazing. That's a really good mix. We've still got hands up from Neville and David. Are they residual hands or are they new hands?
Residual, yes.
Residual hands. It sounds like some sort of new. Right. Well, thank you all so much. We've still got almost 600 people on, but we're going to finish now. But thank you all so much. All of you, your organisations, the NTSG as a whole. It is a great document. And well done, and thank you for your time on this webinar. I should also say a particular thank you to our friends and colleagues at the ICF, represented here by Caroline, because we worked together on this webinar and talked about doing a webinar to begin with. So thank you to the ICF, Caroline, and of course, a wonderful Louise as well. So it's been a great event, lots of people here. Thank you all of you for watching. Hopefully you will register and we will see just as many of you next week when we're talking about tree establishment with Daisy Prasington and Lara Rahman, and then many more webinars to come. So thank you all. I'm sure there's something else I want to say at this point, but I can't remember what it is, so we'll just push on and edit it in later if it seems important. Thanks everyone. Have a lovely evening. Take care, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. Good to see you all. Bye.
Bye. Good to see you.